When I moved to Foxglove Hills, I wasn't looking for a fight. I was looking for quiet. After nearly 3 decades working in civil engineering, bridges, pipelines, roads that cut across nowhere, I'd finally saved enough to buy a modest home on a half-acre lot in the kind of suburb where kids still rode bikes and neighbors still waved. It wasn't perfect. But after years in hotels and project trailers, it was home. And in that home, I found something I hadn't had since childhood: space. Not just physical room to breathe, but mental space too. The kind that makes you want to slow down and return to things that once brought you joy. For me, that meant chickens. Not many, just 6 hens and a rooster. I built them a small coop in the back corner of the yard. Red cedar wood shingled roof, wired fencing, buried a foot deep so raccoons wouldn't dig in. I named the hens after classic rock singers Stevie Janis, Patty Grace Debbie, and Joan. The rooster was Freddie, loud, proud, and entirely unaware of how polarizing his morning performance could be. I checked the Foxglove Hills Homeowners Association rules when I moved in. They were annoyingly long, 52 pages, but I read every line. Nowhere did it say chickens were prohibited. In fact, Section 8.7 made allowances for reasonable backyard agriculture, and several of my neighbors had raised beds, trellised tomatoes, and even one with a small apiary tucked beneath a weeping willow. So I figured I was good. And for a while, I was. Every morning I woke up with the sun, fed the hens, refilled their water, and sat with my coffee as they pecked at the compost I threw into their run. In a world that was always trying to go faster, this was my resistance, my rebellion, my return to something simple and honest. The neighbors loved it, or at least the ones closest to me did. Emma Hayes and Jacob Hayes across the street came by every Sunday to collect eggs with me. An older gentleman down the block started leaving old lettuce and scraps for the hens. Even Mrs. Eleanor Tilson, who had once called me a stubborn loner for refusing to attend the HOA block parties, smiled whenever she heard Freddie's crow cut through the morning fog. But not everyone was a fan. Her name was Karen Delaney. She lived 2 houses over in a pristine white colonial with black shutters, a ring doorbell, and a perfectly trimmed lawn that I suspected was cut with tweezers. From the start, she was watchful. Polite, but in that tight-lipped, posture-too-straight kind of way. Her smile never touched her eyes, and her dog, a yappy little puffball named Princess, seemed trained to bark every time I opened my back gate. Karen was the head of the HOA Architectural Review Committee, which meant she had opinions about everything: mailbox height, shade of mulch, fence, lattice patterns. The kind of woman who measured grass with a ruler and considered dandelions a personal attack. We didn't speak much beyond the occasional nod. And at first, I thought she hadn't noticed the chickens. But Karen noticed everything. One Saturday morning, about 3 months after Freddie and the girls had settled in, I found a printed notice taped to my front door. It looked official: Foxglove Hills Homeowners Association, letterhead the blue crest with the fox's tail, and in bold red letters at the top. Notice of non-compliance, unapproved livestock structure. I read it twice, blinking. Livestock. Was she kidding? Below that, it claimed I was in violation of Article 1212.1 regarding prohibited animal dwellings. I flipped back through my copy of the HOA agreement. Article 12.1 didn't exist. The numbers ended at 10.9. That's when I knew this wasn't about rules. It was about control. I brought the notice to the next HOA meeting. Held in the clubhouse every 3rd Thursday. It was usually a sleepy affair, mostly retirees complaining about teenagers or debating flower bed placements. I arrived early, printed out copies of the agreement, highlighted the relevant sections, and waited. When Karen saw me walk in, her expression didn't change, but her eyes narrowed. I waited my turn to speak during the open forum and calmly explained that there was no rule against chickens, that I had verified this before constructing the coop, and that I would not be removing them unless officially mandated. She stood up slow and composed. "I'm sorry, Mr. Palmer," she said, "but the board reserves the right to enforce evolving standards to preserve community property values." Evolving standards, I asked. "The presence of livestock," she said, emphasizing the word like it was poison, "can significantly impact neighboring home appeal." They're hens, Karen. They don't moo or trample fences. They eat bugs and lay eggs. Her lips pursed. That may be how you see it. That meeting ended in a stalemate, with the board agreeing to review the matter further. I knew what that meant. Karen would dig in, and I'd have to prepare. So I did. I installed additional cameras around the coop. I reinforced the fencing. I gathered testimonials from neighbors who supported me. Because I'd seen women like Karen before, people who mistook their HOA title for a badge, who believed bylaws were a weapon and community was just a word you used when you wanted to make someone feel like the outsider. But this time, I wasn't going to back down. Because this wasn't just about chickens. It was about something bigger. My right to live without fear in a place I called home. And I had no idea just how far she'd go to try and take that away. 2 days after the HOA meeting, I found a certified envelope in my mailbox. It was hand-delivered, no return address, no postage, just my name in black ink and a sealed sticker with the Foxglove Hills Homeowners Association crest. Inside was a letter that managed to be both clinical and condescending. Dear Callahan Palmer, we regret to inform you that your property has been formally cited for violating community standards. Per Section 10.5 of the revised HOA Addendum, passed by vote last quarter. All unauthorized animal structures are subject to removal. Please dismantle your chicken enclosure and rehome all animals by the end of the month to avoid further penalties, including legal action. The revised HOA addendum they referenced hadn't been shared publicly. I checked my email, my mailbox, the HOA bulletin board, nothing. And yet here it was, a new rule, seemingly drafted in the shadows, and now being used like a loaded gun. Karen didn't even wait for the deadline. That weekend, she began her campaign. It started with flyers, glossy double-sided, slipped into mailboxes, and posted on community corkboards, our livestock lowering your property value, complete with a photo of my backyard coop taken without permission. Then came the door-to-door visits. She knocked on neighbors' doors, claiming I was running a miniature poultry farm, spreading unregulated waste and violating health ordinances. She used words like infestation, noise pollution, and attracting predators. To her credit, a few people believed her. Or at least they didn't want the drama. One neighbor pulled his son from our usual Sunday egg pickup without a word. Another stopped waving from across the street. Still, some pushed back. Mrs. Eleanor Tilson, bless her heart, told Karen to worry about her own backyard before she tries to control everyone else's. She started sending me small bags of feed labeled, "From your allies." But the line had been drawn. Karen wasn't going to stop. And she made that clear the following Monday when I received the email. Not from her. From her lawyer. A cease and desist letter claiming my chickens constituted a nuisance under municipal code and that I was in violation of local environmental health standards. The letter threatened a civil suit if I didn't comply within 10 days. I knew it was a scare tactic. The code they cited was meant for commercial farms, not residential coops. I'd done the research, but not everyone had. The letter came with a copy of a formal complaint she had already filed with the local magistrate's court. She was suing me for endangering the community, lowering property values, and refusing to adhere to community governance. The court date was set for 3 weeks out, and just like that, a few hens and a handmade coop had become the centerpiece of a neighborhood spectacle. I remember sitting on my back porch that night, the letter in my hand, listening to Freddie's soft rustle as he shifted in the coop. This wasn't just over chickens anymore. This was about power. Karen had decided she didn't like something, and instead of knocking on my door and having a conversation, she weaponized the system, twisting bylaws, inventing addendums, calling lawyers to force her will on everyone else. I looked out at the coop. Freddie clucked softly, unaware that his very existence was now a matter of litigation. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, a friend from my old project management days, Claire Dorsey. She was sharp, specialized in property and HOA law, and had the kind of calm fire you only found in women who had spent a career dismantling entitled egos. She reviewed the documents, squinted at the legal jargon, and finally looked up at me over her glasses. "She's bluffing," Claire said. "That municipal code doesn't apply here. and the HOA has no authority to enforce an amendment that wasn't voted on and distributed properly. But it's already filed, I said. She nodded. Doesn't mean we won't win, but it means we'll have to work harder. So we gotta work. We drafted a formal response, collected statements from neighbors, pulled city zoning maps that showed the lot lines, and confirmed no restricted agricultural clauses apply to my property. I even got an independent inspection to certify the cleanliness and safety of the coop. I wanted to believe that reason would win, that the judge would see through the pettiness, that Karen would realize she'd overplayed her hand. But I underestimated her thirst for control, because she wasn't trying to win fairly. She was trying to exhaust me, emotionally, financially, socially, and in some ways, it was working. I noticed how people at the post office whispered when I walked in, how the HOA newsletter suddenly began omitting my name from event rosters. At the grocery store, someone behind me in line muttered, "That's the chicken guy." I'd become a spectacle, a headline in our tiny neighborhood's gossip machine, and Karen reveled in it. She'd walk her dog past my house twice a day, letting Princess yip at the coop. She'd stand just outside the edge of my driveway, squinting at the fence line, like she was measuring for the court. She wanted me to snap, but I didn't, because I wasn't playing her game. I was building my own. By the time the court date arrived, Claire and I had not only assembled our defense, we had quietly begun preparing an offense. During discovery, she requested Karen's property records, HOA financial documents, and communications between board members. Karen's team tried to block it. The judge allowed it. And that's when we saw the cracks. Unauthorized expenses, questionable reimbursements, and something very interesting buried in an old survey map. Something about her fence line. It extended 2 feet past her legal property boundary onto HOA-managed land that wasn't hers, that she'd built on, landscaped, and claimed for years. Claire leaned back in her chair when we discovered it. "Oh, she's going to regret this," she said. I wasn't smiling yet. But I was close, because I knew something Karen didn't. This wasn't just about chickens anymore. This was about the truth, and the truth had claws. The courtroom was sterile pale walls, creaky benches, a ceiling fan that clicked once every 4 seconds. I sat at the defendant's table in a collared shirt and clean boots, trying not to look like a man who built chicken coops by hand or spent his afternoons mucking them out. Karen arrived in a pencil skirt and navy blazer, her hair pulled tight, her smile tighter. She carried a leather binder bulging with paperwork, most of which I would later find to be either irrelevant, outdated, or blatantly misrepresented. Her lawyer, Bentley Crow, a young man with too much gel in his hair, tried his best to look experienced. He failed. The magistrate presiding Judge Margaret Tinsley was a woman in her 60s who looked like she had no patience for neighborhood drama. I liked her immediately. Karen was called to speak first. She stood tall at the podium, speaking with the cadence of someone who'd rehearsed in the mirror. "Your Honor, this is not about personal animosity. This is about protecting the integrity of our community." Callahan Palmer knowingly and deliberately introduced livestock into a residential neighborhood in direct violation of community standards and health ordinances. His chickens produce noise waste and have already begun to impact the value perception of homes adjacent to his property. She submitted photos, Freddie mid-crow, a close-up of what was supposedly accumulated droppings, which Claire pointed out had been taken in someone else's yard, and a spreadsheet of local home listings with red arrows pointing to modest price fluctuations. Claire cross-examined with surgical precision. "Ms. Delaney, are you aware that Foxglove Hills does not classify chickens as prohibited animals under its existing bylaws?" Karen blinked. "That depends on the interpretation, yes or no." "No, did you distribute the revised addendum you cited in your violation letter to Mr. Palmer?" "We had internal discussions. That's not what I asked." "No. Did you seek a vote by the HOA membership before enacting the new regulation?" Karen hesitated. "No," she admitted. Claire gave a faint smile and returned to her seat. Judge Margaret Tinsley raised an eyebrow. "Ms. Delaney, this court is not in the business of enforcing non-existent rules. I suggest you stick to actual violations." But the hearing was far from over. Bentley Crow pivoted. He argued that the chickens created a public nuisance and cited a state-level agricultural clause meant for commercial farms. Claire responded by submitting the inspection report from the county health office clean safe, no complaints filed. He argued that the co-op structure violated setback limits. Claire provided measurements stamped by a surveyor showing it fell well within legal range. He argued that the noise disturbed the peace. Claire played an audio recording of Freddie's crow followed by Princess barking 3 times as loud. Laughter rippled through the room. Karen seethed. Judge Margaret Tinsley sighed and declared a recess. Outside the courtroom, Karen confronted me in the hallway. "You think this is over?" she hissed. "You may have won this round, but I promise you'll regret ever bringing chickens into this neighborhood." I said nothing, because I didn't need to. 2 days later, a violation notice appeared on my door. Unauthorized exterior lighting section 9.4 violation. I hadn't changed any lighting. Then another unsanctioned compost pile odor, concern from neighbors. My compost was sealed. No odor. Then unapproved flagpole height. I didn't have a flagpole. It was open season. Every 3 or 4 days, I received a new citation. All unsigned. All slipped under my door in the middle of the night. Then came the social campaign. Karen and her allies on the board started whispering that I was unstable, that I was an agitator, that I had screamed at children and threatened neighbors, none of which was true. One morning, a lawn sign appeared on her property. Protect our neighborhood. Say no to nuisance agriculture. Soon similar signs began popping up on other lawns like a rash. But I stayed quiet. I documented everything. I took photos of each sign, saved copies of every citation, logged the dates and times they appeared. Claire and I began compiling a dossier pattern of harassment and abuse of authority by HOA leadership. It was 47 pages long and growing. Then came the tipping point. A city employee acting on a resident complaint knocked on my door one afternoon to inspect my unlicensed fence expansion. He looked confused the moment he saw my property. "I'm sorry," he said. "I thought there was a construction project." There wasn't. He walked the perimeter, scratched his head, and said, "You're clean." "Who filed the complaint?" I asked. He wouldn't say. But I knew. The next morning, I woke up to find my trash bins, overturned chicken feeds scattered across the lawn, and Freddie limping his leg, scraped and bloodied. That was the moment something shifted in me. Up to that point, I'd treated this like a dispute, an overzealous neighbor, a petty power struggle. But now I saw it for what it was. Targeted aggression, calculated malice. Karen wasn't just trying to win. She was trying to make me leave. But she had underestimated me again. She didn't know I had lived through worse, that I had spent my career designing infrastructure in hostile territories, negotiating land use with government officials, and navigating regulatory mazes thicker than any HOA binder. I wasn't afraid of paperwork, or courtrooms, or people who think they're smarter than everyone else. And so Claire and I changed strategies. We filed a countersuit. Not just to dismiss the current charges, but for malicious prosecution, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and property devaluation. But the real surprise was this. We subpoenaed Karen's property records and land surveys, and that's when we found it. Her property lot number 47 was not fully owned. The back third of her lot, where her expensive patio sat, her pergola, her in-ground hot tub, was built over common land technically owned by the Foxglove Hills Homeowners Association and illegally claimed under a forged plat line that hadn't been updated in over 12 years. Claire read the report aloud slowly. Her backyard is by law not hers. We looked at each other. The smile that spread across her face was slow. I didn't smile, not yet. But I felt something like justice stirring. Because Karen had tried to sue me over chickens, and now I had grounds to take her house, legally. And I intended to do exactly that. Judge Margaret Tinsley ruled against me. Not entirely. She dismissed most of Karen's claims with visible irritation, calling them an overreach of authority and a waste of judicial resources. But she upheld one narrow decision: the co-op structure itself required a retroactive permit under a zoning clarification the city had passed just 6 months earlier. That permit could be granted, but the process would take weeks. Karen seized on that technicality like a shark that had tasted blood. She pushed the HOA to issue a temporary cease and desist on all agricultural activity, citing the active violation. And to my shock, they complied. I was officially ordered to remove the coop or face escalating daily fines starting at $500. Claire advised me to appeal the zoning clause, but I could tell by her face that the court's tolerance for neighborhood drama had reached its limit. "If we push today, we lose tomorrow," she warned. So I did what I hadn't wanted to do. I dismantled the coop. I placed each of the hens in clean carriers, marked their names on the lids: Stevie Janice, Patty Grace, Debbie Joan, and arranged transport to a friend's small acreage 30 minutes outside the city. Freddie, that was harder. He had been with me since the start. Loud, sure, a little too fond of announcing the sunrise. But he was proud and loyal, always circling the hens like a bodyguard with feathers. When I placed him in the crate, he flapped once hard, then stared at me, tilting his head as if to ask what he'd done wrong. I couldn't answer. That night, the yard felt empty. The silence that followed was not peace. It was absence, and Karen, she celebrated. Not openly, but it was in the way she strutted past my lawn with Princess in her arms, smiling like she'd won a medal. It was in the smug glances at the next HOA meeting, the thinly veiled praise she received for protecting the integrity of Foxglove Hills. I didn't show up to that meeting, but Claire did, and she recorded every word. She captured Karen boasting about how some residents just need to be reminded who sets the standards, about how if you let one coop stand, the whole neighborhood turns into a petting zoo. Claire sent me the file that night. I didn't respond. I just listened to it 3 times, letting every word burn deeper into memory. The next morning, the citation stopped. Because Karen had what she wanted. She'd won. At least she thought she had. What she didn't realize was that in her rush to claim victory, she left a trail of overreach and arrogance a mile wide. And I wasn't done. While I mourned the loss of my flock, Claire was hard at work filing our counter lawsuit. The harassment, the defamation, the emotional distress, it was all carefully documented and logged. But the real key, that land survey. We confirmed with the county recorder's office. Karen had submitted a modified plat map in 2009 that claimed 10 extra feet of backyard, originally designated as part of a greenbelt easement owned by the Foxglove Hills Homeowners Association. That modification had never been legally validated. No board vote, no city approval. She had built on it anyway, stone patio lighting an outdoor speaker system, even a hot tub sunk into the ground with a permanent electrical line running beneath. All of it illegal. All of it built on land she didn't own. Claire's eyes lit up when we found it. "We don't just have a countersuit," she said. "We have grounds for ejectment." "Ejectment?" I asked. "It's rare, but it's real," she said. "If a property encroaches on land it doesn't own, and that encroachment devalues or obstructs legal use, you can sue for control or removal. In some cases, if the value imbalance is high enough, you can petition for a lien against the entire property." I stared at her. "You're saying we could take her house?" Claire leaned back, folding her arms. "I'm saying we could make her answer for every inch she stole, on paper. In court. With no theatrics, just law." I nodded. For the next month, we prepared the most thorough case I've ever seen assembled in a civil courtroom. We subpoenaed HOA records going back 15 years, some of which mysteriously disappeared, but enough remained. We tracked financial reimbursements tied to Karen's property improvements that were never voted on. We photographed, measured, surveyed. We built a timeline, a story, and when it was ready, we filed it. Palmer versus Delaney, property encroachment, harassment, and damages. The city posted notice of the suit in the HOA bulletin. Neighbors started whispering. Some of those signs that had once read, "Say no to nuisance agriculture," disappeared overnight. And Karen, she cracked. She began walking faster, speaking sharper at meetings. She filed a motion to dismiss within a week. Judge Margaret Tinsley denied it. She began calling in favors, bringing in an attorney from the state HOA network. He filed a flurry of motions, stalling tactics. Claire countered each one like a chess grandmaster. And then came the deposition. We sat across the table in a neutral legal office. Karen glared at me the whole time. But when Claire slid the survey maps across the table, pointed to the hot tub, and asked, "Who authorized this construction on land you don't own?" Karen blinked, and blinked again, then turned to her lawyer. And for the first time since she taped that notice to my door, she looked uncertain. The rest of the deposition was a dance of deflection and redirection. But the damage was done. She knew what we had, and more importantly, so did the court. As the case moved forward, the tone of Foxglove Hills changed. People began to speak to me again. Mrs. Eleanor Tilson brought me eggs from a friend's farm. Emma Hayes and Jacob Hayes asked if the chickens were ever coming back. Maybe I told them. One day. But I didn't rush it. Because justice doesn't always move fast. Sometimes it takes its time. Sometimes it walks on steady legs and speaks only when necessary. And that's how I intended to win. Not through volume, but through truth, through patience, through the law. The thing about people like Karen is they leave a trail. They operate with such inflated self-confidence, so convinced of their superiority and rightness that they forget something very important: the paper never lies. After the deposition, Claire and I regrouped. We knew her illegal land grab was the backbone of our case, but if we wanted to go further, if we wanted to take her entire house, we'd need to prove a pattern. That this wasn't just one bad measurement or an innocent fence misalignment. We needed intent. So we started digging. Claire submitted public records requests to the county zoning office property assessor and the registrar of deeds. I dove into HOA board minutes archived online, hunting through meeting logs, budget proposals, amendment drafts, every little PDF that had once seemed like boring neighborhood bureaucracy. What we found was gold. Karen had moved into Foxglove Hills 13 years ago. She wasn't one of the original founders, but she had quickly installed herself as the neighborhood standards steward, pushing through aggressive HOA initiatives, stricter lawn codes, more surveillance cameras, and harsher enforcement against non-conforming designs. In one old newsletter dated April 2013, she wrote, "A neighborhood is only as strong as its commitment to shared values. The rules keep us whole, and those unwilling to conform must face consequences." That was Karen's gospel conformity through coercion. But what caught Claire's attention was the financial trail. Every time a new regulation passed, like mandatory black shutters or a ban on solar panels, Karen's home conveniently received a full compliance reimbursement paid out of HOA funds. That included a $200 landscaping reimbursement for common area beautification, which turned out to be for pavers laid on the illegal portion of her backyard, a $900 noise insulation grant for her newly built pergola, while she complained about noisy children next door, and most suspiciously, a $1,450 payout labeled as storm damage repair. The same year, no storms had been reported within 100 miles. In total, we traced $9,700 in unauthorized HOA spending, directly benefiting Karen's property. But it didn't stop there. Glenn Ripley, an older man and former board member, reached out after the article about the countersuit hit local news. We met in a quiet cafe on the edge of town. He wore a windbreaker, spoke softly, and carried a manila envelope like it weighed more than his conscience. "She made me sign it," he said. I didn't know what I was doing. I trusted her. He handed me documents, meeting notes that had never made it into the HOA's official record. Among them was a rough sketch of Karen's backyard expansion plan. In the margin, she had written, "If we can get this classified as private property by June, I'll have time to finish the deck before fall." Claire's eyes gleamed when she read it. That's premeditation. And then Glenn gave us the real gift. He handed over a voice recording, nothing fancy, just something he'd captured on his phone during a heated board meeting in 2016. In it, Karen could be heard berating another board member. "This is my neighborhood. My house is the nicest on the block, and I'm not going to let chickens, bees, or vegetable gardens drag down my home value." If someone doesn't like the rules, they can get the hell out. It was venom, and it was admissible. With that, we amended our complaint to include fraudulent misuse of HOA funds and abuse of governance for personal gain. Karen's legal team responded with panic. They tried to file for a gag order on the evidence, denied. They tried to discredit Glenn's recording, denied. Then they tried to settle. Claire got the email one Friday morning and offered to withdraw all claims, pay $7,500 in damages, and issue a written apology without admission of wrongdoing. I stared at the message for a long time, then shook my head. No. Claire grinned. Good, because I wasn't going to let you say yes. We proceeded full steam ahead. Our lawsuit now sought full reimbursement of all legal costs, restitution for property damage and emotional distress, forfeiture of all improvements built on common HOA land. And if Karen couldn't pay liquidation of her property through court-ordered lien sale, it sounded extreme, but the law was clear. Karen had not only broken HOA rules, she had manipulated them for profit. She had used public resources to enrich herself while vilifying others for far less. And she'd done it repeatedly without remorse. Foxglove Hills was watching closely now. People who had once ignored me began stopping me at the mailbox. "We're rooting for you," they'd say. It's about time someone stood up to her. And Karen. She was unraveling. At the next HOA meeting, one she attended despite not being a board member anymore, she erupted at James Liu for placing an inflatable turkey on his lawn for Thanksgiving. "This is how it starts," she snapped. Lawn clutter. Plastic birds. We're not going to turn into a trailer park. It was caught on video, posted to the neighborhood Facebook group, mocked in comment sections for days. That week, 3 support the chicken signs appeared on different lawns. And then something even more symbolic happened. Emma Hayes and Jacob Hayes left me a note. "We miss the chickens. We made you this." It was a drawing. Crayon scribbled, but unmistakable, 6 hens and 1 very loud rooster all smiling in front of a red wooden coop. I tacked it to the inside of my kitchen cabinet. It reminded me what this was really about. Not just winning, but reclaiming community. Justice doesn't need to be loud. It needs to be relentless. And with every step, we were getting closer. Karen had tried to bury me under false rules, fake citations, and manipulated votes. But now the truth was digging her out. In broad daylight. 1 documented inch at a time. By early spring, the case had become more than a personal battle. It was a neighborhood reckoning. Karen had gone quiet. Not out of remorse or retreat, but calculation. Her legal team stopped responding with fiery threats and began filing delay tactics motions to extend requests for mediation. Even a last-minute petition claiming emotional hardship due to public defamation. It didn't work. Judge Margaret Tinsley had seen enough. A trial date was set. Claire and I met weekly at her office. A tidy bungalow turned law firm, facing a tree-lined street that reminded me of the kind of neighborhood Karen pretended to preserve. We sat across from each other at a reclaimed oak table, surrounded by folders, annotated plats, HOA budgets, and a whiteboard that read in large red letters, "Truth, Timeline, Impact." That was our strategy, not outrage, not theatrics, just facts, truth. Karen's encroachment was real, intentional, and financially beneficial to her. The plat maps proved it. The reimbursement records confirmed it. Glenn Ripley's audio sealed it. Timeline. We had years of abuse on record. Her pattern of enforcing non-existent rules against others while violating real ones herself. Dozens of citations, 10 testimonies, and HOA votes manipulated under the guise of neighborhood preservation. Impact. Not just financial, though that was easy to quantify, but emotional. The stress of being targeted. The forced removal of animals. The public embarrassment. The vandalism. The isolation. Claire even brought in a property assessor to testify that the value of my home had dropped during the period of harassment and began climbing again only after the countersuit made the news. But the real leverage, the common area violation. The part of Karen's backyard that extended onto HOA land wasn't just cosmetic. Her hot tub, pergola, lighting system, and patio were all built on land legally designated as community space, and it had never been sold or transferred. She just taken it for years. Claire filed a motion for injunctive relief, a request that the court immediately prohibit Karen from using or modifying the disputed land pending trial. Judge Margaret Tinsley granted it. A week later, a notice was posted on Karen's back gate encroachment under review. Do not modify this area. I'm told she had a breakdown in her kitchen the day it went up, and still, we weren't done. Claire then filed for equitable lien a civil maneuver that allowed us to argue that if Karen could not repay damages or remove illegal improvements, the court could seize and sell her home to satisfy the judgment. Most people would have settled right there. But Karen wasn't most people. She doubled down. At a court-mandated mediation, she sat across from me in an overcoat 3 sizes too formal and refused to meet my eyes. Bentley Crowe offered a proposal. Drop all claims. Karen resigns from HOA involvement permanently. She pays $15,000 in damages, but retains ownership of the home. Claire looked at me. I didn't even blink. No deal, I said. And for the first time, Karen flinched, because I meant it. I wasn't there to make a deal. I was there to finish what she started. That week, we held depositions. Claire grilled Karen for 6 hours straight. She answered with deflections, vagueness, occasional snark. But the cracks showed. When pressed about her reimbursement checks, she claimed she'd never noticed the funds were HOA-based. When shown the construction invoice for the patio on HOA land, she said I assumed it was fine. But assumptions don't hold up in court, especially when paired with an email where she told another board member, no need to file this with the county, just a small backyard improvement. We introduced more witnesses. Natalia Torres, whose child was cited for playing too loudly. James Liu, who received a letter demanding he remove his satellite dish, even though it was installed 5 years prior. A couple who got fined for having a trampoline despite no such ban existing. Each one testified with quiet resolve, and each story painted the same picture. Karen had used the HOA not to protect, but to punish. She had rewritten the rules in her favor, weaponized community standards, and now the rules were turning on her. As we prepped for trial, something unexpected happened. The new HOA board, elected in the wake of the scandal, voted to file a supporting brief in my case. They stated that Karen had overstepped her authority, abused board resources, and misrepresented the community's values. They even offered to assist with cleanup if the court ordered demolition of the illegal patio. Public sentiment flipped hard. The local paper published a Sunday spread titled, "The Chicken Man versus HOA Queen. How One Lawsuit Changed a Neighborhood." I started receiving letters from other HOA victims across the state. Some shared similar stories of harassment. Others simply thanked me for fighting. One morning, Ethan and Gwyn pulled into my driveway. "Name's Ethan," he said. "I live 3 neighborhoods over. Heard about what you're doing. Brought you these." He handed me a box. Inside were 6 baby chicks, barred rocks just a few weeks old. He tipped his hat and left. I stood there holding the box, unsure whether to laugh or cry. I called Claire that night. 12 months ago, I just wanted to raise some hens, I said. And now I want to change how HOAs treat people. She was silent for a moment, then said, "Then let's win the whole damn thing." And so we pressed on. Deposition complete. Evidence filed. Witnesses prepared. The trial was weeks away, and Karen. She finally went quiet. Not because she was done fighting, but because she knew she was losing. And this time, no citation, no flyer, no fabricated bylaw was going to save her. The law was coming, and it wasn't on her side. The morning of the trial, the courthouse buzzed like a beehive just tapped by a stick. Reporters clustered at the top of the steps. HOA board members, past and present, trickled in through side doors. And I, just a man in a charcoal blazer and borrowed tie, stood at the base of the marble staircase, holding a thermos and watching the sun rise through a fog that hadn't burned off yet. Claire Dorsey arrived 5 minutes later, all crisp lines and focus. She adjusted the strap of her briefcase, handed me a printed copy of our opening statement, and nodded once. "You ready?" I looked up at the columns towering above us, then back at the courthouse entrance. Let's end this. Inside courtroom 3B, everything felt colder, sharper. The wood gleamed like it had been waxed twice. Judge Margaret Tinsley took her seat with the quiet authority of someone who'd presided over 100 feuds bigger than ours, but none quite like this one. To her left sat the court reporter. To the right, the clerk. Directly across from us sat Karen. Her outfit was all gray, a tailored suit that screamed money status and fear. She didn't look at me as I took my seat. Bentley Crowe opened with his usual flair. Your Honor, this is a case of personal grievance gone too far. My client, a respected member of Foxglove Hills, acted in accordance with the rules established by the Homeowners Association. But it was all sound and air. Because Claire stood next, and when she spoke, the room leaned in. This is not a case about chickens. This is a case about power. How it's used, who gets to wield it, and what happens when that power becomes a weapon. My client was targeted not for endangering his neighborhood, but for daring to live a little differently than someone else's definition of order. Judge Margaret Tinsley nodded slightly, and we began. Over the next several days, Claire methodically laid out our evidence. First came the plats and land surveys. A certified civil engineer walked the court through the property lines, explaining how Karen's fence and structures extended 3 feet into HOA-owned common ground. Judge Margaret Tinsley's brow furrowed as he produced drone photos taken 6 months earlier, clearly showing the patio furniture, hot tub, and string lights, all sitting on what the HOA plat labeled Community Green Easement. Then came the HOA reimbursement records. We presented check stubs with her signature, budget lines marked in her handwriting, the infamous landscaping receipt that turned out to be for backyard pavers. And then Glenn Ripley, our star witness, took the stand. He was nervous at first, clearing his throat, often adjusting his glasses. But when Claire played the audio recording, the courtroom went silent. This is my neighborhood. My house is the nicest on the block, and I'm not going to let chickens, bees, or vegetable gardens drag down my home value. The jury listened with jaws tight. Judge Margaret Tinsley scribbled something in her notes. Bentley Crowe objected, arguing the recording was taken without consent. Claire, of course, had already cleared that hurdle. This was a one-party consent state. Objection overruled. Next, we brought out the emotional impact. Neighbors testified about Karen's reign of intimidation, her excessive citations, her loud confrontations, the time she took photos of a disabled veteran's lawn and emailed them to the city claiming code violations. Natalia Torres tearfully described how her son stopped playing in the front yard after Karen accused him of excessive yelling. By the time I took the stand, there wasn't a person in that room unsure of who the aggressor had been. Claire asked me only a few questions. My voice didn't shake. I moved into Foxglove Hills because I wanted peace. I'd served 23 years in uniform. All I wanted was to grow tomatoes, drink my coffee in the morning, and raise a few hens. She leaned closer. And what did you get instead? I didn't blink. Harassment, fines, public humiliation, and silence from the people who were supposed to help. There was a pause. Claire let it hang, then nodded. No further questions. Karen took the stand last. Her voice was steady, almost clinical. She talked about upholding standards, about preserving property value. She spoke of community cohesion and consistent enforcement. But when Bentley asked her directly, "Did you authorize personal spending from HOA funds for your own property?" she hesitated. Her eyes flicked once toward the jury. I was under the impression those reimbursements were within the guidelines. Claire stood for cross. Did you ever submit those reimbursements for board approval? No. But did the board vote on those expenses? They trusted me. Were you ever elected treasurer? Karen's lips thinned. No. Claire stepped closer. So you weren't elected treasurer, you didn't seek a vote, and you didn't disclose your own financial gain to the HOA members? Correct. Karen said nothing. Claire let the silence stretch. Then no further questions. Closing arguments came swiftly. Bentley tried one last time to pivot. My client is not a criminal. She's a woman who tried her best to maintain community standards in the face of increasing resistance. If mistakes were made, they were made in service of something larger: order, stability, shared values. Claire stepped forward. There is nothing noble about tyranny. There is no order in deception. Karen didn't just break the rules, she bent them into weapons and wielded them against anyone who dared to live differently. And now she asks for understanding without offering accountability. The jury was dismissed. We waited. 3 hours passed. Then the clerk re-entered and called us back. The foreman stood holding a folded sheet. We, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff on all counts. Damages $52,000. Karen's home was to be placed under lien if restitution was not paid within 90 days. Judge Margaret Tinsley added a final note. Let this serve as a reminder that community governance is not a license for control. It is a responsibility, a sacred one, to be exercised with transparency, humility, and restraint. Karen didn't cry, but she did not speak again. She walked out surrounded by silence. I stood in the emptying courtroom, heart racing not with adrenaline, but with relief. I didn't fist pump, didn't cheer, just breathed. For the first time in a long time, it didn't hurt to breathe. The courthouse verdict didn't just end a legal battle. It triggered a slow, but undeniable, collapse. Karen's empire, once fortified with bylaws, newsletters, and whispered threats, began crumbling within days. The first sign was subtle. The HOA bulletin board at the neighborhood entrance, where Karen had once proudly pinned her laminated notices in color-coded plastic sleeves, stood bare. Someone had torn down her last memo, something about seasonal lawn decor, and taped over it a handwritten note. We voted. She lost. Within the week, word spread. She had 30 days to pay the $52,000 in damages or forfeit the house through lien enforcement. Foxglove Hills, once either too afraid or too apathetic to intervene, was now collectively watching. I didn't have to say a word. People talked on their own. Claire warned me to brace for a possible appeal. People like her don't let go quietly. But instead, Karen went silent. There were no court filings, no last-minute objections, just a hollow quietness from the grandest house on Petal Ridge Lane. Then came the reveal. An investigative reporter from the local paper who'd followed the trial closely dug deeper into HOA financials from the past 6 years. What she found was shocking even to me. Karen had reimbursed herself for holiday floral enhancements, $4,200 security improvements, $3,800 for a private gate, camera facing only her driveway, community preservation landscaping, $9,000 for a project that mysteriously ended at the edge of her backyard, and perhaps most brazenly, a $6,500 reimbursement for a structural safety assessment that turned out to be a patio inspection for a hot tub installation on stolen HOA land. With each revelation, neighbors grew bolder. At the next HOA meeting, the first in years, not controlled by Karen residents, packed the clubhouse. James Liu, a quiet retired architect, stood and asked, "How did she get away with this for so long?" Natalia Torres added, "Why did no one question the reimbursements?" There was no clear answer, only murmurs, shrugs, a collective shame. But the shame turned into movement. The board, newly restructured, voted unanimously to suspend all non-essential HOA activity for 60 days, launch a full audit of the past decade, freeze remaining discretionary funds until transparency protocols were enacted. It was the first time in years the HOA felt like it belonged to Foxglove Hills again. Meanwhile, Karen's own world narrowed. Her property, once the subject of garden tours and local praise, now stood shuttered. The once immaculate hedges were overgrown. The string lights on her illegal pergola sagged. Neighbors stopped waving. Contractors stopped showing up. I never saw her outside again. But her lawyer called Claire quietly on a Tuesday morning. "She won't appeal," he said. "She's stepping away from the community." Stepping away was putting it kindly. Karen listed her home within 2 weeks. A motivated seller, the listing said. But everyone in Foxglove Hills knew the real story. The lien from our lawsuit meant she couldn't access full proceeds until the judgment was paid. The HOA's new restrictions on illegal patio construction also meant she had to tear down the entire structure before closing. I never witnessed the demolition, but I heard it. The crash of bricks, the rattle of wood beams, the final collapse of her monument to control. Claire handled the property sale documents. Once the lien was satisfied, the house went into foreclosure auction due to other unpaid debts, taxes, legal fees, and 3 years of unreported HOA bonuses she had granted herself quietly, which now required repayment. I didn't bid. But someone did, on my behalf. It was Claire. With the settlement money and a little extra I'd saved, we submitted the winning bid. Karen's house, her fortress, was now mine. I walked through it on a gray morning. The silence inside was heavy. The rooms echoed with the absence of purpose. The master bedroom still smelled of lavender. The office, where she likely drafted her HOA newsletters, still had corkboards on the wall with faded pushpins in the shape of stars. I stood in the backyard, the same space she'd taken illegally from Foxglove Hills, and I could see the spot where she had screamed at me that day over the chickens. I closed my eyes and smiled. Not out of pettiness, out of release. I didn't move into the house. Instead, I turned it into something better. With Claire's guidance and the board's blessing, the property was converted into the new Community Garden and Education Center. The HOA waived all fees. Donations from residents poured in. We built raised beds, compost bins, a seed library, and yes, a coop. 6 hens named by local school kids. They became minor celebrities. Each one wore a little tag with a story on it describing their origin. Parents came by in the afternoons, kids watered herbs. Veterans like me sat on the porch and drank iced tea. Karen's former empire had become a sanctuary, a lesson, a healing place. No one said her name anymore. Not out of fear, but out of collective choice. We'd moved on. Late one evening, I stood by the coop as the sun dipped behind the hill. Claire walked up, holding 2 coffees. "You good?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah, finally." She handed me a folded paper. "What's this?" "The final disbursement," she said. "Settlement closed, liens paid, HOA bylaws amended. You're officially off the grid, no open cases." I took it slowly, then smiled. "Feels strange." She looked out over the garden. "No," she said softly. "Feels earned." We stood there a while, watching the hens scratch at the dirt, the light catching the tops of the rosemary and lavender bushes. No battles left, just growth. The official transfer of ownership came in a plain manila envelope. It didn't carry the weight of drama you might expect from a headline like "Man Sued Over Chickens Wins HOA President's House." No big press conference, no breaking news alerts, just a stamped packet from the county clerk's office that landed in my mailbox on a Friday morning with a quiet authority. But when I held it in my hands, I felt the story shift. For the first time since this war began, I wasn't reacting. I wasn't defending myself. I was simply moving forward. Claire called later that afternoon. "Well," she said cheerfully, "you're now the proud owner of a granite countertop kitchen. You didn't build a pergola. You helped get torn down and a driveway lined with azaleas that bloom like clockwork." "Sounds like poetic justice," I replied. "Feels more like poetic irony," she said. "You won the war, but you still have to mow her lawn." We both laughed. But she was right. It wasn't just a win, it was a responsibility. I spent the first week walking through every room, not as a trophy collector, as a witness. The Karen I'd known, the enforcer, the voice behind the letters, and the fines had lived in a space filled with order, not warmth. Her kitchen was pristine, unused. Her pantry held 5 jars of imported olives, all unopened. Her guest room beds were made tight as military bunks, with not a wrinkle or misplaced thread. There were no family photos, no books, just binders, rows of them, labeled by year, Foxglove Hills minutes violation records, annual budget plans, and oddly one marked future proposals. That one I read twice. Inside were sketches of a Karen memorial garden to be installed at the clubhouse, benches with her name, a fountain with a plaque. It chilled me, not from vanity, but from the realization that somewhere along the way, she really believed she was the hero of Foxglove Hills. And maybe in her own narrative, she had been. That was the hardest truth to accept. I didn't want revenge anymore. I wanted clarity. So I made a decision. I would keep the house, but not to live in it. The Community Garden and Education Center continued to grow. By early summer, we had tomatoes, green beans, kale, and sunflowers. The HOA board, now transparent and elected, fairly held open forums once a month. We invited local school kids for workshops on composting. Retired veterans taught carpentry and co-op building. The house, Karen's former house, became a hub. We remodeled the interior to add a reading room, a small kitchen, and a wide porch with rocking chairs. We called it the Commons. No one ever mentioned where it came from. It didn't matter. Its origin story was embedded in every plank. A place built from conflict, rebuilt with care. Still, not everything was rosy. Karen didn't disappear completely. A few weeks after the garden opened, I spotted her. She was parked across the street in an old silver sedan. She didn't get out. Just sat there, hands on the wheel, watching. Her hair was different, shorter, gray roots visible. I walked out and stood on the curb. She didn't wave. Neither did I, but I nodded. A small one. She drove away. That was the last time I saw her. Claire called that night. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said. "I think she came to see it for herself." Claire didn't ask what I meant. She knew. "Do you ever think she regrets it?" I asked quietly. "I think she misses control more than she misses people," Claire said. "But maybe for a moment, she saw something better than control." I thought about that for a long time. On the 1-year anniversary of the lawsuit verdict, we held a little celebration. Nothing flashy. Lemonade, folding chairs, a string band, families wandering between the garden beds, kids naming the new chicks. The mayor showed up. She shook my hand, thanked me for setting an example. But I didn't feel like an example. I just felt restored. Later that evening, as the last of the music faded and neighbors headed home, I stood by the coop. The hens clucked softly, settling in for the night. The sky blushed orange and purple. Emma Hayes tugged at my shirt. "Mr. Palmer," she said, "is it true you used to have chickens in your yard and a lady tried to take them away?" I knelt to her level. "Yep," I said. "But we got them back. And now they live here." She looked around. "Did she get in trouble?" I paused. "Let's just say, we made things right." She nodded like that was enough, and it was. Later, as I locked up the Commons, I turned off the porch light and stood in the doorway. The house that once symbolized control now glowed with laughter and light. It had taken so much to get here, humiliation, resistance, courts, truth. But we got here, one small feathered rebellion at a time. The garden glistened with dew that morning, tiny droplets clinging to lettuce leaves, like pearls left by the night. The sun had barely risen, but Foxglove Hills already hummed with a new rhythm. Laughter echoed faintly from behind the fence, and the soft cluck of hens rolled through the yard like a lullaby for the land. It was in moments like this that I finally understood the word healing, not as a dramatic turn of fate, but as a gentle, persistent unraveling of pain. A reclamation of space, both physical and emotional, that had once been wrapped in barbed wire and court dates. I stood by the coop, coffee in hand, watching as Emma Hayes and Jacob Hayes fed the chickens cracked corn from small plastic cups. The birds pecked and bobbed, clucking in rhythm, and the kids giggled every time a hen flapped its wings in excitement. Jacob looked up. "Did you name them?" I smiled. "They were named by vote." He grinned. "I picked Feather McPeck." I pointed to a black and white hen with a little wobble in her walk. "There she is." He beamed, and I felt it again. What we'd won was never about land. It was about belonging. The Commons at Foxglove became a sanctuary, not in the religious sense, though I saw people pray here, but in the human sense, a place of pause, of perspective. Veterans who had once felt invisible now led workshops on woodworking and resilience. Parents with autistic children found solace in the quiet rows of vegetables. Seniors taught young couples how to start seeds and how to save them. The walls of the old house that once echoed with HOA ultimatums now breathed stories, laughter, and music. Once a month, we held open mic evenings, not for performance, for storytelling. People came up and shared tales, some funny, some heartbreaking. One neighbor told the story of his late wife's herb garden. Another spoke about losing his job and rediscovering himself by growing tomatoes. Eventually, someone nudged me to take the mic. I hesitated the first few times. But one cool October evening, I stood up with a mug of cider and said, "My name's Callahan Palmer, and I used to get fined for chickens." The crowd laughed. I didn't want to fight. I just wanted eggs, some peace, and maybe a little bit of the life I lost after deployment. But instead, I got taken to court humiliated and told that what I loved didn't belong here. I paused, looked around at the porch lights, the garden, the faces leaning forward. But the truth is, it did belong. And now, thanks to all of you, this place belongs to everyone. I stepped down to a quiet cheer, not for drama. For the recognition of a circle closed, the news traveled. A local station aired a segment called From HOA Target to Community Hero. They showed clips of the garden, the chickens, and even included a snippet of the old lawsuit's verdict being read aloud. It wasn't flashy, but it was sincere. People from other towns came to visit. Some asked how we fought back. Others asked how we built something better. I always said the same thing. We stopped waiting for permission. Claire Dorsey and I grew closer. I never saw that coming. We'd both been through divorces, burned by old scars, guarded. But somewhere between shared coffee at zoning hearings and late-night emails untangling legal codes, something real had grown. Not a whirlwind romance. A companionship built on mutual fire and calm. One evening after the garden closed, she stayed late. We sat on the porch, both watching the stars peek out. She broke the silence first. You know, when I first met you, I thought you were going to snap. I raised an eyebrow. Snap, yeah. The quiet kind of rage, she said. But instead you just built things, even when everything was falling apart. I didn't respond immediately, but I reached over and took her hand, not as a grand gesture, just as a truth. A few months later, we received an official letter from the county. In recognition of our efforts, the Commons at Foxglove was designated as a community resilience site. It came with a small grant, a plaque, and the option to expand with the county's support. We held a little ceremony. Emma Hayes and Jacob Hayes pulled the cover off the plaque. It read, "The Commons at Foxglove, born from resistance, grown by unity." Underneath, in smaller letters, were the names of every neighbor who had contributed, from the gardener who built the raised beds to the teacher who donated books to the reading nook. My name was last, not out of modesty, but because by then I wasn't the story anymore. We all were. Sometimes I think about Karen. Not with anger, with something more complicated. She built a structure on control. When it collapsed, she didn't have anything left to stand on. I don't know where she is now. But I hope wherever she went, she's building something different. One final story. A year after we opened the garden, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single note. They were beautiful chickens. I should have asked about them first. It was signed only with a K. I folded the note and placed it in the coop's mailbox, the one where kids left drawings and thank you cards for the hens. And I let it go. Because in the end, that's what peace looks like. Not a perfect ending, just a steady rhythm. Eggs, dirt, sunlight, community. Just as chickens and peace again.